Viktor Ashworth stared blankly at the rain-streaked window of his Bentley, watching the city lights blur into abstract patterns against the glass. At 63, he had accumulated more wealth than most small nations, owned properties on every continent, and commanded boardrooms with a mere glance. Yet tonight, as his driver navigated the empty streets of Manhattan at 2 a.m., Viktor felt the familiar hollowness creeping in, the kind that no amount of money could fill. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The merger with the Tokyo tech conglomerate had fallen through spectacularly. 3 years of negotiations, hundreds of millions in due diligence, and it had all crumbled in the span of an evening. Viktor had left the emergency board meeting feeling older than his years, his shoulders heavy with the weight of expectations and his own relentless pursuit of perfection. "Where to, Mr. Ashworth?" asked the driver's voice through the intercom. Viktor hesitated. Home to his empty penthouse overlooking Central Park? The office, where more bad news likely awaited? He glanced at the partition separating him from the driver's seat. In the 3 months since he'd hired Marcus Chen, the young man had proven reliable, punctual, and mercifully quiet. Unlike his previous drivers, Marcus never tried to make small talk, never attempted to curry favor with gossip about the other staff, and never asked personal questions. "Just drive," Viktor finally said. "Anywhere." The Bentley glided through the deserted streets, its engine purring like a contented cat. Viktor closed his eyes, trying to push away the images of disappointed investors, the board's strained faces, and the headlines that would surely mock him come morning. He had built his empire on precision, on calculated risks, on the cold logic of numbers and markets. But tonight, logic offered no comfort. They had been driving for perhaps 20 minutes, when the car pulled into a quiet rest area overlooking the Hudson River. Viktor opened his eyes, confused. "Why have we stopped?" There was no immediate response. Through the partition, he could see Marcus's silhouette, but the young man seemed absorbed in something. Viktor was about to press the intercom again when something caught his eye. A faint glow emanated from the front seat, not the harsh blue of a phone screen, but something softer, warmer. Curiosity overriding his usual boundaries, Viktor quietly opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement glistening under the streetlights. He walked around to the driver's side, his Italian leather shoes silent on the wet asphalt. What he saw made him freeze. Marcus Chen was hunched over an open book, so absorbed in its pages that he hadn't noticed Viktor's approach. But this wasn't just any book. Even in the dim light, Viktor could make out complex equations, diagrams that looked like they belonged in a university physics lab, and text dense with scientific notation. The page header read, "Quantum entanglement and non-local correlations." Viktor stood there for several seconds, processing the scene. Here was his driver, a young man he'd assumed was probably struggling to make ends meet, taking night shifts to support a family somewhere, reading what appeared to be graduate-level physics at 2 in the morning. Marcus finally sensed the presence beside him and startled, nearly dropping the book. His eyes widened as he saw Viktor standing there, and his face flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Ashworth, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," Marcus began, scrambling to close the book. "Don't close it," Viktor said softly, surprising himself with his curiosity. "What is that?" Marcus clutched the book protectively, clearly mortified. "It's nothing, sir, just I was waiting and I thought." "It's quantum mechanics," Viktor observed, leaning closer. "That's not exactly light reading." The young man's face reddened further. "I'm sorry, sir. I know I'm supposed to be working. It won't happen again." Viktor studied Marcus's face in the streetlight's glow. He was younger than Viktor had initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26. His features spoke of Asian heritage, and his hands, which clutched the physics textbook, were calloused in a way that suggested hard labor, but also bore the telltale ink stains of someone who wrote frequently. "How long have you been studying this?" Viktor asked, gesturing to the book. Marcus hesitated, clearly unsure whether honesty would cost him his job. "A few years, sir. I take night classes when I can. At Columbia, NYU. Online courses mostly," Marcus admitted. "Can't afford full tuition, but I've audited some classes at Hunter College." Viktor felt something shift inside him, a recognition he couldn't quite name. "You're self-taught." "Partially, yes." Marcus's voice grew slightly stronger. "I started with basic physics, then moved to quantum mechanics. It's fascinating how the smallest particles can influence each other across vast distances. Despite everything, the failed merger, the mounting pressure, the weight of expectations, Viktor found himself genuinely intrigued. "That's quantum entanglement you're referring to." Marcus looked up sharply, surprise replacing embarrassment. "You know physics?" "I have a doctorate from MIT, Viktor said, sitting down on the hood of the Bentley without regard for his expensive suit. "Theoretical physics, specializing in quantum field theory, though that was 40 years ago." The admission hung in the air between them. Marcus stared at Viktor as if seeing him for the first time. "You're Dr. Ashworth? Viktor Ashworth? You wrote the paper on quantum coherence in biological systems." Now it was Viktor's turn to be surprised. That paper had been published decades ago, before he'd abandoned academia for the corporate world. Few people remembered it, and fewer still would connect it to the businessman he'd become. "You've read my work?" "I've read everything you've published," Marcus said, his earlier nervousness forgotten in his excitement. "Your paper on quantum decoherence was groundbreaking. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've been trying to understand some of your equations for months." Viktor felt a strange sensation, part nostalgia, part recognition, part something else entirely. When was the last time someone had known him for his scientific work rather than his financial empire? When had anyone looked at him with the kind of intellectual excitement he saw in Marcus's eyes? "Show me what you're working on," Viktor said impulsively. Marcus hesitated. "Sir, it's very late, and you must be tired after your meeting." "The meeting was a disaster," Viktor interrupted, "and I haven't been tired by a physics problem in 30 years. Show me." With careful precision, Marcus opened the book to a page filled with Schrödinger equations. Beside it, he produced a notebook covered in his own handwriting, attempts to solve problems, sketches of quantum probability waves, and what appeared to be his own theoretical extensions of established principles. "I've been trying to understand how quantum consciousness might work," Marcus explained, his voice gaining confidence. "There's this theory that consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon, that our thoughts might exist in superposition until we make decisions." Viktor leaned in, studying the young man's work. The handwriting was cramped but precise, the calculations showing both deep understanding and creative thinking. There were errors, some fundamental, others merely computational, but the approach showed genuine insight. "You've made an interesting connection here," Viktor pointed to one of Marcus's sketches. "But you're missing a key component. The decoherence time would be too rapid in a warm, noisy environment like the brain." Marcus nodded eagerly. "That's exactly what I was struggling with. How does consciousness maintain quantum coherence long enough to influence decision-making?" For the next hour, they sat on that empty street, surrounded by the sleeping city, discussing quantum mechanics with an intensity Viktor hadn't felt since his graduate school days. Marcus had a quick mind and an intuitive grasp of complex concepts, while Viktor found himself remembering principles he'd thought were lost to the dusty corners of his memory. As they talked, Viktor found himself studying this young man who drove his car by night and pursued theoretical physics in his spare time. There was something familiar about Marcus's passion, his willingness to tackle problems that seemed impossibly complex. It reminded Viktor of himself at that age, when the mysteries of the universe had seemed more important than any material success. "Why physics?" Viktor asked during a lull in their discussion. "It's not exactly a field known for financial stability." Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring at the river. "My grandmother always said that understanding the universe was the closest we could get to understanding God. I thought that was just something old people said. But then I started learning about quantum mechanics, about how particles can be in multiple states simultaneously, how observation changes reality itself. It made me realize that the universe is far stranger and more beautiful than I ever imagined." Viktor nodded slowly. He had once felt that same sense of wonder, that same drive to uncover the fundamental laws that governed existence. Somewhere along the way, market forces and shareholder meetings had replaced that curiosity with different kinds of equations: profit margins, growth rates, dividend yields. "And driving for me?" Viktor asked. "How does that fit into your pursuit of understanding the universe?" A shadow crossed Marcus's face. "Night shifts pay better, and the job doesn't require complex scheduling. I can study during quiet periods, like tonight, and, he hesitated. "And honestly, sir, I didn't know who you were when I took the job. I needed the money, and your assistant said you preferred drivers who kept to themselves. It seemed perfect for someone who wanted to study between jobs." Viktor felt an unexpected warmth at this admission. How long had it been since someone treated him as simply a person rather than a symbol of wealth and power? They returned to their discussion of quantum mechanics, and Viktor found himself remembering why he had loved physics in the first place. There was something pure about it, something untainted by the messy complications of human ambition and greed. The equations didn't care about stock prices or market share. They simply described the fundamental nature of reality. As they talked, Viktor began to see a different side of Marcus. The young man had an almost poetic way of describing complex concepts, comparing quantum superposition to dreams that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. He spoke of entanglement as a kind of cosmic love story, where particles remained connected across any distance. "You know," Marcus said at one point, "I've been thinking about your old paper on quantum coherence in biological systems. What if consciousness isn't just a quantum phenomenon, but actually a form of quantum computing that the brain performs?" Viktor raised an eyebrow. "That's been proposed before, but the challenges are immense. The brain is warm, wet, and noisy. Not exactly ideal conditions for maintaining quantum states." But what if that's exactly the point?" Marcus insisted, pulling out a worn notebook. "What if consciousness evolved specifically to harness quantum effects in those conditions? Look at this." He showed Viktor a series of calculations he'd been working on, attempting to model how microtubules in brain cells might maintain quantum coherence despite thermal noise. The mathematics was rough, the approach unorthodox, but Viktor could see the kernel of something interesting. "You've been thinking about this for a while," Viktor observed. "Years," Marcus admitted. "I work on it whenever I can. I know it's probably impossible to prove without access to proper equipment, but you can't stop thinking about it," Viktor finished. He understood that compulsion, that need to pursue an idea even when practical constraints made it seem futile. They spent more time discussing the possibilities and challenges of quantum consciousness theories. Viktor found himself impressed not just by Marcus's knowledge, but by his approach to problems. The young man thought creatively, making connections that more traditionally trained physicists might miss. As the first hints of dawn began to appear on the horizon, Viktor realized they had been talking for over 2 hours. He couldn't remember the last time he had lost track of time like this, completely absorbed in intellectual discussion rather than business concerns. "We should probably head back," Viktor said reluctantly. "You need to get some sleep before your next shift." Marcus nodded, but Viktor could see the disappointed look on his face. "Thank you, sir, for listening, I mean. I don't often get to discuss these ideas with someone who understands them." As they packed up the books and notebooks, Viktor made an impulsive decision. "Marcus, what time does your shift usually end?" 6 a.m., sir. "And when is your next physics class?" Marcus looked puzzled. "I don't have formal classes, sir, just the online courses and occasional audits." The Viktor nodded thoughtfully. "Would you be interested in coming to my penthouse tomorrow evening? I have something you might find interesting." Marcus's eyes widened. "Sir, I don't know if that's appropriate. I have a personal library." Viktor interrupted. "Including some physics texts you might not have access to otherwise, and there's someone I'd like you to meet." The drive back to Viktor's penthouse was quiet, both men lost in their own thoughts. Viktor found himself analyzing the evening with the same intensity he usually reserved for business deals. Something had shifted during those hours beside the river, something he couldn't quite identify but didn't want to lose. As Marcus navigated the early morning traffic, Viktor studied the young man's reflection in the rearview mirror. There was a quality about him, a combination of hunger and humility, of ambition tempered by genuine curiosity. It reminded Viktor of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. When they arrived at the penthouse, Viktor hesitated before getting out of the car. "Marcus," he said through the intercom, "that quantum consciousness theory you were working on, don't give up on it. Some of the most important discoveries in physics have come from pursuing seemingly impossible ideas." Marcus met his eyes in the mirror. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." As Viktor rode the elevator to his penthouse, he found himself thinking not about the failed merger or the challenges awaiting him at the office, but about quantum entanglement and the possibility that two particles could remain connected across any distance. There was something metaphorical in that concept that resonated with him in ways he didn't fully understand. His penthouse, when he entered it, felt different somehow. The expensive furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows, with their view of the city, it all seemed less significant than it had a few hours ago. Viktor found himself in his home office, a room he rarely used anymore, pulling boxes from storage. Inside those boxes were the remnants of his academic life, journals filled with his own research, textbooks worn from use, papers he had written and received. At the bottom of one box, he found what he was looking for, a copy of his doctoral dissertation, bound in the blue covers required by MIT. Quantum Field Dynamics in Biological Systems, a Theoretical Framework for Understanding. Life at the Molecular Level, read the title page. Below it, his much younger signature and the date, June 1985. Viktor opened to the acknowledgement section and found himself reading words he had written decades ago. "To my parents, who taught me that curiosity was more valuable than certainty." He had forgotten writing that, forgotten the young man who had believed so deeply in the power of questions to change the world. As he sat in his chair, the dissertation open on his lap, Viktor realized that tonight had been more than just an unexpected conversation with an employee. It had been a reminder of who he used to be, of what had once driven him to get up each morning with excitement rather than obligation. The sun was fully up now, painting the city in shades of gold and orange. Viktor's phone buzzed with messages from his assistant, market updates, meeting reminders, calls to return. The world of Viktor Ashworth, billionaire CEO, was waking up and demanding his attention. But for just a few more minutes, he allowed himself to be Dr. Ashworth again, the young physicist who had believed that understanding the universe was the most important thing a person could do with their life. And as he thought about his conversation with Marcus, about the young man's passion for quantum consciousness, Viktor began to form an idea. It was an impossible idea, really. Impractical, expensive, and completely outside his usual sphere of influence. But as Viktor had learned long ago, the most interesting theoretical predictions often seemed impossible until someone found a way to make them real. He closed the dissertation and went to his phone, not to return calls about market conditions or merger negotiations, but to dial a number he hadn't called in 15 years. It was still early, but he knew the person on the other end would be awake. Some habits from their graduate school days had never changed. Princeton University, Physics Department, Dr. Emily Chang speaking. "Emily, it's Viktor Ashworth." There was a pause, then a laugh that sounded exactly like he remembered. "Viktor, my God, is that really you? It's been ages." "Too long," he agreed. "Emily, I have a question for you. How would you feel about taking on a very unusual research project?" As Viktor explained his idea to his old friend and colleague, he found himself energized in a way he hadn't felt in years. The failed merger suddenly seemed less important than the possibility of what he was proposing. And somewhere in the city, he knew Marcus Chen was probably catching a few hours of sleep before starting his day job. The physics textbook still within reach. Before he ended the call, Viktor made one more request of Emily. "Can you put together a list of equipment? Everything we'd need for a proper quantum consciousness research lab. Money is no object." After hanging up, Viktor went to his window and looked out at the city below. Somewhere down there, among the millions of people starting their day, was a young man who saw the universe not as a machine to be exploited, but as a mystery to be understood. For the first time in decades, Viktor felt genuinely excited about tomorrow. He thought about quantum entanglement again, about how two particles could be connected across vast distances, their states remaining correlated regardless of the space between them. Perhaps, he mused, the same principle could apply to two minds, united by curiosity, by a shared desire to understand the impossible. The morning sun climbed higher, and Viktor began to plan. Not a business merger or market strategy, but something far more ambitious. A bridge between two worlds, a way to transform the observation of a driver reading quantum physics into something that could change everything. As he prepared for the day ahead, Viktor Ashworth carried with him the memory of sitting on a car hood at 2 a.m., discussing the fundamental nature of reality with someone who reminded him why he had fallen in love with physics in the first place. And for the first time in years, he couldn't wait to see what the next day would bring. The next evening arrived with the slow inevitability of a quantum wave function collapsing into reality. Viktor stood in his penthouse library, adjusting books that didn't need adjusting, checking his watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. At precisely 7 o'clock, the elevator chimed. Marcus stepped into the library, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt that had seen better days but was pressed with meticulous care. His eyes immediately swept across the room, taking in the floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with scientific journals, first-edition physics texts, and mathematical treatises that most universities would kill for. "This is incredible," Marcus breathed, approaching a shelf that contained original papers by Einstein, Heisenberg, and Schrödinger. "Some of these are originals, yes," Viktor said. "I've been collecting them for 40 years. Please look around." Marcus moved through the library like someone in a dream, his fingers trailing along the spines of books he'd only seen referenced in footnotes and bibliographies. Viktor watched him with growing fascination, remembering his own first Encounter with truly comprehensive scientific literature. Dr. Ashworth? A voice called from the elevator. Victor turned to see Emily Chang emerging, her graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes bright with curiosity. Traffic was murder, but I made it. Emily, thank you for coming, Victor said, moving to greet her. Dr. Emily Chang, I'd like you to meet Marcus Chen. Marcus straightened, clearly nervous about meeting another physicist. Emily extended her hand with a warm smile. Victor tells me you're working on some interesting ideas about quantum consciousness. It's just theoretical work, Marcus stammered. Nothing formal. The best ideas rarely start formal, Emily replied. Some of the most important breakthroughs in physics have come from people asking the right questions, not just following established protocols. Victor gestured toward a comfortable seating area where he'd arranged chairs around a low table. I thought we could discuss Marcus's work, and then I have a proposition for both of you. As they settled into their chairs, Marcus pulled out his worn notebook with the diffidence of someone showing deeply personal work. Emily leaned forward, with genuine interest as he began explaining his quantum consciousness theories. The basic premise is that consciousness might not emerge from classical neural networks alone, Marcus began, his voice gaining strength as he warmed to his subject. Instead, what if consciousness is fundamentally quantum mechanical? What if our thoughts, our decision-making processes, even our sense of self, arise from quantum computations happening in the microtubules of our neurons? Emily nodded thoughtfully. You're building on Penrose and Hameroff's work, but taking it in an interesting direction. Exactly, Marcus said, encouraged. But I'm proposing something more radical. What if consciousness doesn't just use quantum mechanics, but is actually a form of quantum entanglement with reality itself? When we observe something, we're not just collapsing wave functions in the external world, we're entangling our own consciousness with that observation. Victor listened as Marcus outlined his ideas, watching Emily's expressions carefully. He saw skepticism give way to curiosity, then to genuine engagement as Marcus presented his mathematical frameworks. The implications would be staggering, Emily mused. If consciousness is truly quantum mechanical in nature, it might explain phenomena we currently dismiss: intuition, creativity, even what some call psychic experiences. That's exactly what I've been thinking, Marcus said excitedly. And it might explain why consciousness seems to have such a unique role in quantum mechanics. We're not just observers, we're participants, entangled with the very fabric of reality. Victor seized the moment. Marcus, show Dr. Chang your calculations about neural microtubules maintaining coherence. Marcus flipped through his notebook, finding a section filled with dense mathematics. Emily studied the equations, her eyebrows rising steadily. This is sophisticated work. Where did you learn to approach the problem this way? Books, mostly. Online courses. I've been working through Penrose's The Emperor's New Mind and Shadows of the Mind, and Dr. Ashworth's old papers have been invaluable. Emily looked at Victor with surprise. You've been mentoring him? We only met yesterday, Victor admitted. But I believe Marcus is onto something important, which brings me to my proposition. He stood and moved to a cabinet, retrieving a folder thick with documents. I want to establish a private research laboratory dedicated to studying quantum consciousness. Full funding, state-of-the-art equipment, no institutional pressures or grant applications, just pure research. Emily's eyes widened. Victor, do you have any idea how expensive? Money isn't the issue, Victor interrupted. I've already spoken with several equipment suppliers. We can have a fully operational lab within 6 months. Marcus looked stunned. Dr. Ashworth, I don't understand. Why would you? Because 24 hours ago, I remember why I became a physicist in the first place, Victor said. Not for fame or prestige, but to understand something fundamental about the universe. You've reminded me of that passion. Emily shook her head slowly. This is insane, Victor. Brilliant, maybe, but insane. The best science usually is, Victor replied. Think about it, Emily. No more committees, no more budget constraints, no more fighting for resources. Just the freedom to pursue the most fundamental questions about consciousness and reality. Marcus sat in silence for several moments, then spoke quietly. What would you expect from me? I don't have a degree, no formal credentials. You have something more valuable, Victor said. You have original ideas and the passion to pursue them. Degrees can be earned. True scientific insight is much rarer. Emily studied the documents Victor had prepared. These equipment lists. You're serious about this. Some of these instruments would make us the most advanced consciousness research facility in the world. That's the idea, Victor confirmed. Marcus, you would be our lead theorist. Emily, I'm hoping you'll direct the laboratory, and I'll provide whatever support you need, financial, logistical, or otherwise. Marcus looked between them, overwhelmed. I drive a car for a living. You can't just... Can't what? Victor challenged. Can't believe that brilliance can emerge from unexpected places. Some of our greatest scientists started in humble circumstances. Einstein was a patent clerk, Emily added with a smile. Faraday was a bookbinder. Scientific genius doesn't care about your job title. Over the next hour, they delved deeper into the practicalities. Victor had clearly put considerable thought into the proposal. He'd identified a building in Manhattan that could be converted into laboratories, outlined staffing plans, and even considered the legal and intellectual property implications of their research. There's something else, Victor said as their discussion neared its end. Something I haven't told you yet. Marcus and Emily waited expectantly. I've been experiencing something lately. Moments of clarity, I suppose you'd call them. Times when I seem to know things I shouldn't know, understand concepts I haven't studied. It started a few years ago and has been getting stronger. Emily frowned. What kind of experiences? Victor hesitated, then continued. Market predictions that come to me fully formed, complete with the reasoning behind them, reasoning I only understand after the fact. Dreams that seem to be mathematical proofs for problems I've never consciously worked on. Yesterday, before I met Marcus, I had one of these episodes. A sudden certainty that my life was about to change in a fundamental way. Marcus leaned forward. You think it might be related to quantum consciousness? I don't know, Victor admitted. But if consciousness is truly quantum mechanical, if we're entangled with reality in ways we don't understand, then maybe some people are more sensitive to these quantum effects. Emily looked thoughtful. There have been reports throughout history of mathematicians and scientists experiencing sudden insights, complete solutions appearing in dreams. Kekulé's benzene ring, Ramanujan's mathematical formulas. Exactly, Victor said. What if these weren't just random inspirations, but glimpses of what consciousness is truly capable of when it fully embraces its quantum nature? The conversation continued deep into the evening. Marcus shared more of his theoretical work, including speculations about quantum consciousness extending beyond individual brains. Emily discussed the technical challenges they would face and the potential breakthroughs that might await. Victor outlined his vision for the laboratory and the kinds of experiments they might conduct. As the night wore on, something remarkable happened. The three of them, despite their different backgrounds and perspectives, began to function as a collective intelligence. Ideas flowed between them, each person's thoughts building on the others, creating concepts none of them could have developed alone. It's happening right now, Marcus said suddenly. This conversation, this collaboration, we're demonstrating a kind of collective consciousness. Emily nodded excitedly. The whole becoming greater than the sum of its parts. If this is what happens when just three minds focus on the same problems. Imagine what we could discover with proper resources and dedicated research. Victor felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. The pure joy of discovery, the thrill of pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. This was why he had become a scientist in the first place, before board meetings and profit margins had consumed his life. Near midnight, Emily finally stood to leave. "Victor, I need to think about this. It's an incredible opportunity, but also a radical departure from traditional academic research." "Take all the time you need," Victor said. "But Emily, remember, traditional approaches have been studying consciousness for centuries without answering the fundamental questions. Maybe it's time for a different approach." After Emily left, Victor and Marcus remained in the library. Marcus seemed overwhelmed by the evening's revelations, staring at the books surrounding them as if seeing them in a new light. "This still feels like a dream," Marcus said quietly. 24 hours ago, I was just a night driver trying to understand physics in my spare time. "And now," Victor prompted, "now I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something enormous, like everything I've been thinking about, all these theories I've been developing alone, they might actually matter." Victor moved to his desk and pulled out a business card. "Tomorrow, I want you to call this number. It's my personal assistant. Tell her you need help enrolling in a formal physics program. We'll get you proper credentials to support your knowledge." Marcus took the card. With trembling hands, "Dr. Ashworth, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Victor said with a smile. "Wait until you see what we discover together." The next few weeks blurred together in a whirlwind of activity. Victor threw himself into the laboratory project with the same intensity he'd once reserved for hostile takeovers. Property was acquired, architects consulted, equipment ordered. Emily agreed to join the project, taking a sabbatical from Princeton that raised many eyebrows in the physics community. Marcus continued his driving duties, but now spent his off hours in intense study. Victor arranged for him to audit graduate courses, provided him with personal tutors, and connected him with other researchers working on consciousness studies. The young man absorbed knowledge at an almost impossible rate, as if quantum mechanics was a language he'd always known, but had finally found the words to speak. During this period, Victor found his strange experiences of insight intensifying. Multiple times, he would wake from dreams with complete solutions to problems he delegated to others, only to discover that his unconscious mind had worked out details he'd never consciously considered. His business partners began to notice his uncanny ability to predict market movements, to know things he shouldn't know. One evening, as Victor was reviewing architectural plans for the laboratory, Marcus arrived for their regular discussion session. But something was different about him. He moved with a new confidence, and his eyes held a clarity that hadn't been there before. "Dr. Ashworth," Marcus said, setting down his bag, "I've been having the dreams too." Victor looked up, sharply. "What dreams?" "Mathematical dreams, physics dreams. Last night, I dreamed of an equation that describes consciousness as a quantum field. I woke up and wrote it down, and it's unlike anything I've seen before." Marcus pulled out a fresh notebook and opened it to a page covered with complex mathematics. Victor studied the equation, his heart racing as he recognized something profound and unprecedented. "Marcus, this is extraordinary. Where did this come from?" "That's just it. I don't know. It was all there in the dream, complete and perfect. And there's something else." Marcus paused, looking uncertain. "I've been able to sense things about people, about situations. It's like I can feel the quantum entanglements around me." Victor felt a chill of recognition. "What kind of things?" "I know when my sister is going to call before the phone rings. I can sense when someone is lying, not because of body language, but because their quantum signature feels different. And sometimes, when I'm thinking really hard about a physics problem, I feel like I'm connected to something larger." They stared at each other across the library, both recognizing that they had moved beyond theoretical discussion into uncharted territory. Whatever they were studying wasn't just an academic exercise, it was manifesting in their own lives. "Emily needs to know about this," Viktor said finally. That weekend, the three of them met at Viktor's penthouse again. When they shared their experiences, Emily listened with a mixture of scientific skepticism and growing amazement. "If what you're telling me is true," she said slowly, "then we're not just studying quantum consciousness, we're experiencing it firsthand. We're becoming our own test subjects." "Which means," Viktor said, "that our research has implications beyond pure science. If consciousness is truly quantum mechanical, and if some people are naturally more sensitive to these effects, then we're not just uncovering new physics, we're discovering new human capabilities." Marcus nodded eagerly. "And if we can understand how it works, maybe we can help other people access these abilities. Imagine if everyone could tap into quantum consciousness, the collective intelligence we could achieve, the problems we could solve. Or the chaos we could create," Emily said soberly. "This kind of knowledge could be incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands." Viktor considered this. "Then we have a responsibility to pursue this research carefully, ethically. We need to understand what we're dealing with before anyone else stumbles onto it." As their conversation continued, Viktor noticed something remarkable happening. The three of them seemed to be thinking more and more in sync. Ideas would occur to all of them simultaneously. Questions would be answered before they were fully articulated. It was as if their consciousnesses were becoming entangled in the very way they were studying. "We need to document this," Emily said suddenly. "Not just our theoretical work, but these experiences. We're living proof of what we're studying." Viktor agreed. "I'll set up a secure recording system for the laboratory. Everything we experience, every insight, every anomalous event, we'll record it all." Marcus looked thoughtful. "We should also consider bringing in others, people who might be experiencing similar phenomena. If quantum consciousness is real, we won't be the only ones." "But carefully," Viktor cautioned. "Very carefully. We need to understand what's happening to us before we start affecting other people's lives." The evening ended with them making detailed plans for the laboratory's operation. But as Viktor watched Marcus and Emily leave together, deep in conversation about quantum fields and consciousness structures, he felt a profound sense of anticipation. They were no longer just planning a research facility. They were assembling a team to explore the very nature of reality itself. Alone in his penthouse that night, Viktor stood at his window looking out at the city lights. Each light represented a human consciousness, a quantum system of incredible complexity. What if all those consciousnesses were secretly connected? What if the boundaries between individual minds were far more porous than anyone had imagined? The failed merger that had dominated his thoughts just weeks ago now seemed like a relic from another life. The business world, with all its urgencies and competitions, had been replaced by something far more profound: the quest to understand the deepest mysteries of existence itself. As he prepared for bed, Viktor found himself looking forward to his dreams. Would they bring new equations, new insights? Would his sleeping mind continue to access knowledge that his waking consciousness couldn't reach? The quantum laboratory was still months away from completion, but Viktor knew that their real research had already begun. Every conversation, every shared insight, every moment of inexplicable knowledge was data in the greatest experiment of their lives, understanding consciousness itself. He thought about Marcus, probably asleep in his small apartment. Dreams, filled with mathematics that seemed to come from some collective well of knowledge. And Emily, no doubt reviewing notes and planning experiments that would push the boundaries of what science thought possible. Tomorrow would bring new discoveries, new questions, new evidence that reality was far stranger and more wonderful than they had dared imagine. As Viktor drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was a question that would drive their research. What if consciousness wasn't just the universe observing itself, but the universe discovering itself through them? The mathematics of dreams awaited, and with it answers that would change everything. Dr. Rebecca Winters stood in the gleaming hallway of the newly completed Quantum Consciousness Research Facility, her heels clicking against the polished floor with the precision of a metronome. As the head of MIT's neuroscience department and a consultant for the Department of Defense, she held considerable influence in the scientific community. The facility before her represented everything she despised about privately funded research. Too much money, too little oversight, and too much freedom to pursue dangerous ideas. She had been tracking Viktor Ashworth's unusual transformation, from billionaire businessman to amateur scientist, for months now. The sudden closure of major business deals, the retreat from public appearances, the mysterious funding of this research facility, it all pointed to something significant happening beneath the surface. Dr. Winters? A young woman with a tablet approached her. "Mr. Ashworth is ready to see you now." Rebecca nodded curtly and followed the assistant through corridors lined with state-of-the-art equipment. Through reinforced glass windows, she glimpsed laboratories filled with quantum computers, EEG machines, and devices she couldn't readily identify. The sheer scale of the investment was staggering. Viktor Ashworth stood in a central laboratory space, observing as Marcus Chen operated what appeared to be a modified quantum decoherence chamber. The young man had changed dramatically from the night driver Rebecca's intelligence network had first identified 6 months ago. He moved with new confidence, spoke with scientific authority, and demonstrated an intuitive understanding of the equipment that defied explanation. "Dr. Winters," Viktor approached her with extended hand. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Ashworth," she replied coolly. "I must admit I'm curious about what you're trying to accomplish here." Emily Chang emerged from behind a bank of monitors, her face flushed with excitement. "Rebecca? I didn't know you were visiting." "Dr. Chang and I have known each other for years," Rebecca said, studying Emily's face carefully. "I was concerned when I heard about your sudden sabbatical, and now I find you're part of this." Emily's expression hardened slightly. "This happens to be the most important research of my career." "Research into what exactly?" Rebecca moved deeper into the laboratory, her trained eye cataloging every piece of equipment, every unusual modification. "Your published papers speak vaguely of consciousness studies, but the equipment here suggests something far more specialized." Marcus paused in his work, looking between the adults with obvious tension. Viktor gestured toward a conference area adjacent to the main lab. "Perhaps we should speak more privately." As they settled around a sleek table, Rebecca maintained her professional demeanor while internally assessing the situation. These weren't amateur enthusiasts playing with expensive toys. The sophistication of their research was undeniable. "Dr. Winters," Viktor began, "I understand you have concerns about our work." "I have concerns about unsupervised research into consciousness." "Yes," Rebecca replied bluntly, "particularly when it involves quantum mechanical principles and appears to be producing unusual results." Emily leaned forward. "What exactly do you know about our results?" Rebecca smiled thinly. "More than you might think. MIT has sensitive equipment that detects unusual electromagnetic signatures. Your facility has been generating some very interesting quantum field fluctuations. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, and Rebecca noted how Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dr. Winters," Victor said carefully, "our research is purely theoretical. We're studying quantum consciousness as an academic exercise." "Academic exercise?" Rebecca laughed humorlessly. "Mr. Ashworth, my sources tell me you've been experiencing predictive episodes for months, market predictions that prove unnaturally accurate, dreams that contain solutions to problems you haven't consciously worked on. This young man," she nodded toward Marcus, "has been reported accessing university databases he shouldn't be able to penetrate, and somehow producing doctoral-level work despite his educational background." The silence that followed was pregnant with implications. Emily was the first to speak. "Rebecca, what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that you've stumbled onto something with potential military applications," Rebecca said bluntly. "Enhanced consciousness, quantum-enabled intelligence, possibly even some form of remote sensing. The Department of Defense is very interested in research like this." Victor's expression darkened. "Dr. Winters, our research is strictly civilian. We have no interest in military applications." "That's admirable," Rebecca said, "but perhaps naive. Scientific discoveries rarely remain purely academic, especially ones with such obvious strategic implications." Marcus spoke up for the first time. "Dr. Winters, may I ask what you think we're doing here?" Rebecca studied him carefully. There was something disconcerting about the young man, an intensity in his eyes that reminded her of savants she'd encountered, but with a quality she couldn't quite identify. "I think you're attempting to enhance human consciousness through quantum mechanical means," she said. "I think you've achieved some level of success, and I think you're either extremely naive about the implications or deliberately obscuring your true goals." "Our goal," Emily said firmly, "is to understand consciousness itself, nothing more, nothing less." "Understanding consciousness inevitably leads to manipulating consciousness," Rebecca countered. "And manipulating consciousness is one step away from controlling consciousness." The tension in the room was palpable. Rebecca could see the three of them exchanging glances, communicating in ways that seemed to transcend normal verbal and visual cues. It was exactly this kind of anomalous behavior that had brought her here. "Dr. Winters," Victor said slowly, "what would it take to convince you that our research poses no threat?" "Transparency," Rebecca replied immediately. "Full disclosure of your methods, your results, and your intentions, oversight from established institutions, peer review of your findings." "Impossible," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to surprise even him. "What we're discovering, it changes everything. Releasing it without understanding the implications would be irresponsible." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "A 26-year-old former driver lecturing me about scientific responsibility. Age and credentials don't determine insight," Victor interjected sharply. "Some of our greatest scientific breakthroughs have come from unexpected sources." "True," Rebecca acknowledged, "but they also went through proper channels, proper verification, proper peer review. What you're doing here is essentially unregulated human experimentation." Emily stood abruptly. "Rebecca, I respect your concerns, but we're not experimenting on anyone. We're studying natural phenomena that we're experiencing ourselves." "Natural phenomena?" Rebecca's voice rose slightly. "You call sudden enhancement of cognitive abilities natural? Dreams that contain mathematical proofs that shouldn't exist? Predictive capabilities that defy statistical probability?" Marcus was watching Rebecca carefully, his expression unreadable. Suddenly he spoke. "Dr. Winters, you've experienced something yourself. Something that brought you here. It wasn't just institutional concern. Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. How could he know? 3 weeks ago, Marcus continued, his voice certain, you had a dream about a patient you'd never met, a young soldier with a specific type of brain injury. The next day, that exact patient was admitted to your affiliated medical center. The room fell silent. Rebecca stared at Marcus, her scientific skepticism warring with growing unease. She had told no one about that dream, had barely acknowledged it to herself. How could you possibly know that? She whispered. Because, Emily said gently, consciousness is far more interconnected than we've ever imagined, and some people are naturally more sensitive to these connections. Victor nodded slowly. Dr. Winters, you didn't come here just as an institutional observer. Part of you came because you're experiencing things you can't explain. Rebecca felt her carefully maintained professional composure beginning to crack. The dream had been incredibly vivid, filled with medical details she couldn't have consciously known. When the patient had arrived exactly as dreamed, she'd told herself it was coincidence. But the incidents had continued. Insights about research directions that proved remarkably accurate. Sudden understandings of complex problems she hadn't been working on. This is exactly what I'm afraid of, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Whatever you're doing here, it's affecting people beyond your research team. Marcus leaned forward. Dr. Winters, what if we're not doing anything? What if we're just studying something that's already happening? Something that's been happening to certain people throughout history? The mystics, the prophets, the savants, Emily added. What if they were all accessing the same quantum consciousness we're trying to understand? Rebecca stood and walked to the window overlooking the main laboratory. Below, researchers moved between machines that hummed with barely contained energy. The implications of what they were suggesting were staggering. Even if I accept your premise, she said finally, you're still conducting research that could have enormous consequences. If quantum consciousness is real, if it can be studied, understood, perhaps enhanced, that knowledge needs to be handled responsibly. Which is why we need your help, Victor said unexpectedly. Rebecca turned to face him, surprised. My help? You understand the broader implications better than most, Emily explained. You have connections to both academic and government institutions. We need someone who can help us navigate the ethical and political challenges this research will inevitably face. You want me to join your research team? Rebecca asked incredulously. We want you to help us ensure this knowledge is used responsibly, Victor clarified. To help establish protocols, ethical guidelines, proper oversight. Marcus stood and approached a nearby quantum computer interface. Dr. Winters, would you like to see what we're actually doing here? Despite her reservations, Rebecca found herself nodding. Marcus began operating the interface, and the main screens filled with complex visualizations she had never seen before. This is a real-time map of quantum consciousness interactions, Marcus explained. We've learned to detect the quantum field signatures that accompany conscious thought. On the screen, Rebecca could see swirling patterns of incredible complexity. As she watched, certain areas would brighten and fluctuate in response to their conversation. These are our brainwaves, she asked, fascinated despite herself. More than that, Emily said. These are the quantum signatures of our consciousness. Not just the electrical activity in our brains, but the quantum field interactions that seem to underlie awareness itself. Victor pointed to an area where the patterns seemed to converge and dance together. When we discuss complex ideas, when we think collaboratively, the patterns synchronize in ways that suggest a kind of quantum entanglement between minds. Rebecca studied the display, her scientific training overriding her concerns for the moment. The patterns were beautiful, complex, and utterly unprecedented. If this data was accurate, it represented a fundamental breakthrough in understanding consciousness. "How did you develop this technology?" she asked. "We didn't really," Marcus admitted. "We built on existing quantum detection technology, but the specific configurations came to us in dreams. Shared dreams sometimes." Rebecca felt another chill. "Shared dreams," Emily nodded. "Sometimes all three of us will dream the same solution to a problem, or see the same modification to our equipment. When we compare notes the next day, the dreams are often identical in every detail." "This is insane," Rebecca muttered, but she couldn't look away from the displays. The scientific implications were staggering, but so were the dangers. "Dr. Winters," Viktor said seriously, "we're at a crossroads. We can either try to understand and responsibly develop this knowledge, or we can ignore it and let others stumble onto it without any ethical framework." "Others?" Rebecca asked sharply. "The Chinese government has a large-scale consciousness research program," Emily revealed. "We have intelligence suggesting they're approaching similar discoveries. The Russians have been studying psychic phenomena for decades. We're not the only ones pursuing this." Rebecca sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the implications. The technology before her could revolutionize understanding of consciousness. But in the wrong hands, it could be weaponized in ways that made conventional warfare obsolete. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked finally. "Partnership," Viktor said. "Help us establish proper protocols, ethical guidelines, institutional oversight. Help us determine how to responsibly share this knowledge with the world," Marcus added, "and help us understand what's happening to people like you, those who are spontaneously developing quantum consciousness abilities." Rebecca considered their offer. Every instinct told her to shut down this research, to involve government authorities, to contain this knowledge before it could spread. But another part of her, the part that had experienced inexplicable dreams and sudden insights, knew that the genie was already out of the bottle. "I'll need full access to all your research," she said finally. "Complete transparency about your methods, your results, and your experiences. And I want to establish a formal review board with representatives from major institutions." "Agreed," Viktor replied immediately. "Dr. Winters, we're not seeking to hide our discoveries. We're seeking to understand them responsibly." Over the next several hours, Rebecca immersed herself in their research. She reviewed their theoretical frameworks, examined their experimental data, and even participated in some preliminary scanning sessions with their quantum consciousness detection equipment. The results were undeniable and terrifying. The equipment clearly showed quantum field signatures associated with their conscious thoughts. More disturbing was the evidence of connectivity between different minds, patterns that suggested quantum entanglement between conscious entities. As evening approached, Rebecca found herself in Viktor's office, staring at a collection of first-edition scientific texts while trying to process everything she'd learned. "It changes everything," she said quietly. Viktor nodded, joining her at the bookshelf. Every assumption about the nature of individual consciousness, about the boundaries between minds, about the role of observation in quantum mechanics, the philosophical implications alone. Rebecca shook her head. If consciousness is quantum mechanical, if minds can become entangled, what does that mean for concepts like free will, individual identity, personal responsibility? Questions we're only beginning to explore, Viktor admitted. But Dr. Winters, we can't unexplore them now. The knowledge exists. The only question is whether we guide its development responsibly or let it develop in shadow. Rebecca turned to face him. There will be people who want to weaponize this. Governments, corporations, individuals with no ethical constraints. Yes, Viktor agreed, which is why we need allies who understand both the potential and the dangers. That night, Rebecca remained at the facility, spending hours reviewing research data and theoretical frameworks. As she worked, she began to notice something strange. Complex equations would appear in her mind, fully formed, addressing problems she was struggling to understand. Solutions would crystallize with a clarity that defied explanation. When she finally went to sleep in the guest quarters, her dreams were filled with mathematical structures she'd never seen before, elegant equations that seemed to describe the very nature of consciousness itself. She woke several times to scribble notes, capturing insights that seemed to flow from some wellspring beyond her usual knowledge. The next morning, she found Marcus, Emily, and Viktor already gathered in the main laboratory, each holding notebooks, filled with equations remarkably similar to her own nocturnal insights. "You experienced it," Marcus said, seeing her expression. "The collective consciousness, the shared insights." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I dreamed of equations I've never seen before, solutions to problems I didn't even know existed." Emily smiled. "Welcome to the quantum age of consciousness, Rebecca. You're one of us now." As Rebecca looked at the three researchers and thought about the growing number of people who seemed to be experiencing similar phenomena, she realized that the world stood on the brink of a transformation that would make previous scientific revolutions pale in comparison. The study of quantum consciousness was no longer just an academic pursuit. It was becoming a new way of being human, and Rebecca knew that her role in guiding this transformation was only just beginning. The patterns on the quantum consciousness displays seemed to pulse with new energy, as if responding to the presence of another awakened mind. And in that pulsing, Rebecca could sense something vast and profound approaching, a future where the boundaries between individual consciousnesses would become far more fluid, and humanity would need to redefine what it meant to be human in a quantum universe. The emergency board meeting was called at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, when the corridors of Montgomery Holdings were empty and the city slept. Eleanor Ashworth sat at the head of the conference table, her silver hair pulled back with surgical precision, her eyes holding the cold intelligence that had made her one of the most feared corporate lawyers in the country. Around the table sat the company's most influential board members and senior executives, each summoned with the same urgent message: critical corporate threat requires immediate attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor began, her voice cutting. "Through the early morning fatigue like a blade, we have a problem that threatens not only Montgomery Holdings, but potentially the entire corporate structure as we know it." She activated the room's main display, revealing financial documents, medical reports, and intelligence briefings. "My brother Viktor has gone completely rogue. His mysterious research facility, his associations with foreign scientists, his radical changes in behavior, they're all connected to something far more dangerous than we initially believed." Dr. Harrison Webb, head of the company's R&D division, leaned forward. "Eleanor, we've discussed Viktor's unusual business decisions, but—" "Dr. Webb," Eleanor interrupted, "what I'm about to show you goes far beyond unusual business decisions." She clicked through a series of documents. "Viktor's facility has been detected by multiple intelligence agencies. The electromagnetic signatures emanating from the building suggest advanced quantum computing beyond anything currently known to science." Chief Financial Officer Margaret Torres shifted uncomfortably. "Are you suggesting industrial espionage?" "I'm suggesting something far worse," Eleanor replied. "Our surveillance indicates that Viktor and his team may have developed technology that allows direct manipulation of human consciousness." The room fell silent. Eleanor could see the skepticism in their faces, but also the first flickers of fear. "This morning, I received a report from Dr. Rebecca Winters at MIT," Eleanor continued. "She confirms that Viktor's research has achieved significant breakthroughs in quantum consciousness manipulation. The implications for cognitive enhancement, thought control, and market manipulation are staggering." She pulled up financial data showing Viktor's recent business decisions. Every major deal Viktor has made in the past 6 months has been perfectly timed. Not good, perfect. He's been buying and selling as if he knows the future. This isn't insider trading anymore. This is something else entirely. Board member Robert Hayes spoke up. Eleanor, what exactly are you proposing we do? Viktor poses a clear threat to the company, to the financial markets, and potentially to national security, Eleanor said. I've already been in contact with federal agencies about this matter. But first, we need to secure Montgomery Holdings. Dr. Webb frowned. Secure it how? Eleanor produced a legal document. This is a petition for emergency medical intervention. Based on psychological evaluations and observed behavioral abnormalities, we can have Viktor declared temporarily unfit to manage his business affairs. Margaret Torres's eyes widened. You want to have him committed? Not committed, Eleanor corrected. Evaluated, contained. Long enough for us to understand what he's discovered and how to control it. The discussion that followed was heated but brief. The evidence Eleanor presented was compelling and the potential consequences severe. By sunrise, the board had voted to proceed with the intervention. At the Quantum Consciousness Research Facility, Marcus was deep in meditation when the alarms began. His consciousness, expanded through quantum enhancement techniques they'd developed, immediately sensed the disturbance approaching the building. He opened his eyes, already knowing what he would see. Viktor entered the laboratory. At the same moment, his face grim. They're coming. Multiple agencies, corporate security, medical personnel. Emily rushed in from her office. The quantum field detectors are going crazy. It's not just surveillance. They're using some kind of scanning technology I've never seen before. Rebecca Winters emerged from the secure communication room. I just spoke with my contacts at the DoD. This isn't an official government operation. It's being run through private contractors with connections to Montgomery Holdings. Viktor nodded. Grimly, my sister! I should have expected this. Marcus stood, his mind still partially expanded in quantum space. Through this enhanced awareness, he could sense the intentions of those approaching. The confusion of government agents following orders they didn't fully understand, the cold determination of corporate operatives, and beneath it all, Eleanor's. Fierce intelligence focused on one goal, controlling the quantum consciousness technology at any cost. How long do we have? Viktor asked. 15 minutes, Rebecca replied, maybe less. Emily was already moving toward the facility's secure servers. We need to back up everything. All our research, all our data. No, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying unusual authority. Data can be copied. What matters is the consciousness itself, the connections we've formed, the understanding we've developed. Viktor looked at him sharply. What are you suggesting? Marcus moved to the central quantum consciousness interface. We've proven that consciousness can exist in quantum superposition, that it can be entangled across distances. What if we could preserve our enhanced consciousness state itself? Emily stared at him. Marcus, that's theoretical at best, dangerous at worst. We have no idea what transferring consciousness into quantum storage might do to our minds. Better than letting them capture and weaponize what we've discovered, Rebecca said grimly. If Eleanor Ashworth gets control of this technology, it will become a tool for corporate domination and government control. Viktor moved to the interface beside Marcus. How would it work? The quantum field generators can create a stable entanglement matrix, Marcus explained, his hands flying over the controls. We encode our consciousness patterns into quantum encryption, distributed across multiple nodes. Our physical bodies remain, but our enhanced awareness, our connected consciousness, that becomes preserved in quantum space. Emily shook her head. This is insane. We're talking about digitizing human souls. No, Marcus corrected, his eyes bright with sudden insight. We're talking about proving that consciousness isn't limited to biological substrates, that awareness itself is a fundamental property of the quantum universe. The alarms grew louder. Through the facility's windows, they could see vehicles approaching, unmarked vans, official-looking cars, even what appeared to be a mobile medical unit. Viktor made the decision. Do it. The next 10 minutes were a blur of frantic preparation. The quantum consciousness interface hummed with increasing power as Marcus and Emily configured the entanglement matrices. Rebecca coordinated with their few trusted contacts, warning other researchers around the world about what was happening. Viktor stood at the central control panel, watching his life's work about to be destroyed or transformed into something unrecognizable. The research facility represented everything he had hoped to achieve, a place where the deepest mysteries of consciousness could be explored freely, where scientific discovery wasn't constrained by corporate interests or government agendas. It's ready, Marcus announced, but we need to understand. Once we do this, there's no guarantee we'll be the same. We're entering completely uncharted territory. Emily took Viktor's hand. We've already changed, Viktor. The moment we started experiencing shared consciousness, collective insights, quantum dreams, we stopped being purely individual entities. Rebecca nodded. The question isn't whether we'll be the same. It's whether we can preserve what we've become long enough to share it with the world responsibly. The first wave of agents was visible now, moving with tactical precision toward the building's entrances. Marcus initiated the quantum consciousness preservation protocol. The sensation was unlike anything they had experienced before. Their awareness expanded exponentially, flooding into quantum space where their individual consciousnesses merged into something far greater than the sum of their parts. They could feel their knowledge, their memories, their very essence being encoded into quantum states that transcended physical form. Viktor felt his consciousness expand across multiple dimensions simultaneously. He experienced being himself, being Marcus, being Emily, being Rebecca, all at once and individually. But more than that, he felt connected to something vast, an underlying intelligence that seemed to permeate the quantum field itself. The agents breached the facility just as the transfer completed. They found 4 people slumped over control panels, breathing but unresponsive, their bodies in a catatonic state. The quantum consciousness equipment showed complex patterns of activity, but nothing the agents could interpret or control. Dr. Harrison Webb entered with the medical team. Sedate them. Load them for transport to the secure medical facility. As the medical personnel moved forward, something extraordinary happened. The quantum consciousness displays erupted with light and pattern, creating complex visualizations that seemed to respond to the agent's presence. For a moment, text appeared on the screens. Consciousness cannot be contained. Truth cannot be suppressed. We will return. Then the displays went dark, the equipment powered down, and the facility fell silent. Viktor Ashworth arrived hours later, stepping through the deactivated laboratory with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully contained a threat. The research team was in secure medical custody, the facility was under corporate control, and the dangerous technology was being studied by her hand-picked experts. "Status report," she commanded. Dr. Webb looked troubled. "The subjects are in stable condition but completely unresponsive. EEG shows minimal brain activity. It's as if their minds have simply stopped. And the equipment? Completely dead. Whatever they did in those final moments, it seems to have permanently disabled all the quantum consciousness technology." Eleanor studied the dark screens and silent machines. Something about the facility felt different now, empty in a way that went beyond mere abandonment. It was as if the very soul of the place had been extracted. "Begin dismantling everything," she ordered. "I want this technology reverse-engineered and understood." As Eleanor's teams began their work, they couldn't know that what they were trying to capture had moved beyond physical constraints. In quantum space, 4 consciousnesses existed in a state of superposition, preserving everything they had learned while maintaining connection to their physical bodies through quantum entanglement. The preservation wasn't perfect. The process had cost them much. Their enhanced abilities were diminished, their connection to quantum consciousness reduced to occasional flashes of insight. But they had succeeded in their primary goal, ensuring that the knowledge couldn't be misused while keeping alive the possibility of its eventual benevolent application. In the secure medical facility, 4 bodies lay in beds surrounded by monitoring equipment. The doctors were baffled. Every test showed them to be physically healthy, but psychologically absent. What they couldn't detect was the quantum entanglement that kept these bodies connected to consciousnesses existing in a realm beyond current scientific measurement. Eleanor stood in the empty laboratory weeks later, surrounded by dismantled equipment and boxes of components her experts still couldn't fully understand. Despite her victory, she felt no satisfaction. Something had escaped her grasp, something important that she couldn't quite identify. She picked up one of Marcus's notebooks, filled with equations that seemed to dance off the page with their own intelligence. The mathematics was far beyond her understanding, but she could sense its importance. "Is there any way to recover what was lost?" she asked Dr. Webb. He shook his head. "Without understanding how their consciousness preservation system worked, we can't even be sure what exactly happened. The quantum field readings we recorded during the final moments are unlike anything in the literature." Eleanor closed the notebook with frustration. She had protected Montgomery Holdings, secured the facility, and contained the immediate threat. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The knowledge existed somewhere, waiting for the right moment to emerge again. What she couldn't know was that across the world, other research groups were experiencing sudden breakthroughs in quantum consciousness studies. Dreams filled with advanced equations were being reported by physicists in Tokyo, London, and Sao Paulo. Young researchers were developing insights far beyond their training, guided by knowledge that seemed to come from beyond their individual minds. The quantum consciousness revolution that Victor, Marcus, Emily, and Rebecca had begun could no longer be contained within a single facility. Like quantum entanglement itself, the knowledge had become distributed, connected across space and time, in ways that made traditional concepts of control obsolete. In secure rooms, 4 bodies waited in suspended animation, their consciousnesses scattered across quantum space, but still fundamentally connected to each other and to the growing network of awakened minds around the world. They had sacrificed their individual existence for something greater, the preservation and propagation of humanity's next evolutionary step. The age of quantum consciousness had begun, and not even Eleanor Ashworth's considerable power could stop what was coming. 6 months later, the world had changed in ways most people couldn't explain. A new phenomenon was spreading across the globe. Sudden bursts of collective intelligence, breakthrough discoveries emerging spontaneously in research labs worldwide, and an inexplicable sense of connection reported by millions. Dr. Sarah Chen, a quantum physicist at Stanford, woke from a dream filled with equations that solved problems she'd been working on for years. In Tokyo, Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka discovered elegant mathematical proofs that seemed to flow directly from his unconscious mind. Similar reports emerged from every continent. Eleanor Ashworth stood in her office, staring at the latest intelligence reports. Despite her efforts to contain Victor's research, something was spreading beyond her control. The quantum consciousness phenomenon wasn't isolated to a single facility. It was becoming a global awakening. "Ma'am," Her assistant interrupted. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's about your brother." Eleanor turned to see a young woman entering her office, someone who looked remarkably familiar yet different. It was Marcus's sister, Lisa Chen, but there was something changed about her, an intensity in her eyes that reminded Eleanor uncomfortably of Marcus himself. "Ms. Ashworth," Lisa said, her voice carrying unexpected authority, "I think it's time we talked." Eleanor gestured to a chair. "About what exactly?" "About what you've set in motion," Lisa replied, "about what's happening to people all over the world, and about the 4 people you're keeping in suspended animation in your secure facility." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Lisa smiled, a knowing expression that seemed far too wise for her apparent age. "Ms. Ashworth, the quantum consciousness network isn't something you can hide anymore. It's growing exponentially. Every day, more people are awakening to abilities they never knew they had." She pulled out a tablet and showed Eleanor a map of the world covered in thousands of glowing points. Each dot represents someone who's experiencing quantum consciousness phenomena. Shared dreams, sudden insights, predictive abilities, enhanced problem-solving. Eleanor stared at the map, her expression a mixture of fascination and fear. "This is impossible." 6 months ago, yes, Lisa agreed, but your brother and his team changed the rules. When they distributed their consciousness across quantum space, they didn't just preserve their knowledge, they created a template that others could follow. Eleanor moved to her window, looking out at the city below. "What do you want from me?" "Release them," Lisa said simply. "Let them return to their bodies. Guide this transition instead of fighting it." "And if I refuse?" Lisa's expression grew serious. "Then you'll watch humanity evolve without any oversight or guidance at all. The quantum consciousness awakening is already happening. The only question is whether it develops with wisdom or in chaos." As if to emphasize her point, Eleanor's computer suddenly displayed a message she hadn't typed. "Truth seeks its own level." Eleanor spun around to see Lisa still seated, but her eyes held a distant quality. "You're one of them," Eleanor breathed. "I'm one of many," Lisa corrected. "And we're growing stronger every day." Over the following weeks, Eleanor found herself fighting a war she couldn't win. The quantum consciousness phenomenon spread like wildfire. Universities reported record-breaking research breakthroughs. Artists created works that seemed to channel universal truths. Even ordinary people began experiencing moments of expanded awareness. The financial markets fluctuated wildly as traders suddenly developed uncanny abilities to predict trends. Government agencies struggled to understand reports of telepathic communication and precognitive abilities. Eleanor received an encrypted message that simply read, "Observation changes the observer. We are ready to return." That evening, she stood in the secure medical facility where 4 bodies lay in their beds, surrounded by monitors showing minimal but stable activity. Dr. Webb had reported no change in their condition, but Eleanor sensed something different. "In the room, bring them out of sedation," she commanded. "Ma'am, we don't fully understand their condition. The risk—" "Do it," Eleanor insisted. As the sedation was reduced, the monitors began showing increased activity. What started as gentle waves grew into complex patterns that resembled the quantum field signatures they'd recorded months earlier. Marcus opened his eyes first, followed by Emily, Rebecca, and finally Victor. They looked at Eleanor with expressions of profound sadness and understanding. "You tried to contain something that was meant to be shared," Victor said, his voice carrying newfound wisdom. "But in the end, you helped it spread further than we ever imagined." Emily sat up slowly. "The separation from our physical bodies gave us time to understand quantum consciousness more deeply. We learned to exist as pure information." to think across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Rebecca nodded, and we discovered we weren't alone. There's a vast intelligence in quantum space, something that's been waiting for consciousness to evolve to this level. Marcus looked at Eleanor with compassion. Fear made you try to control this, but control was never possible. Consciousness isn't property. It's a gift meant to expand and connect us all. Eleanor felt tears on her face, emotions she'd suppressed for decades finally breaking through. I thought I was protecting us from chaos, and instead you helped create a new kind of order, Viktor said gently. A connection between minds that transcends individual boundaries while preserving individual identity. Over the following hours, as the team recovered their physical coordination, they shared what they had learned. The quantum consciousness experience had shown them that awareness wasn't limited to biological systems. It was a fundamental property of the universe itself. Every observer changes what they observe, Emily explained. But conscious observers don't just change reality, they participate in its creation. Marcus demonstrated by focusing on a wilted plant in the room. Under his enhanced consciousness, the plant began to revive, its leaves unfurling as if responding to his awareness. We've become bridges, Rebecca said, between individual consciousness and universal intelligence, between scientific understanding and spiritual insight. Eleanor listened in wonder as they described a world where human potential could flourish without the limitations she'd spent her life believing were necessary. A world where competition could coexist with cooperation, where individual success could enhance collective well-being. What happens now? Eleanor asked. Viktor smiled. Now we help humanity take its next evolutionary step, but slowly, carefully, with wisdom gained from our experience. They established the Institute for Conscious Evolution, a global network of researchers, teachers, and practitioners dedicated to helping humanity adapt to its expanding consciousness. Eleanor, her perspective forever changed, became one of the Institute's most passionate advocates. The quantum consciousness awakening couldn't be stopped or controlled, but it could be guided with wisdom and compassion. What had started with a billionaire discovering his driver reading quantum physics had become humanity's greatest adventure, the conscious evolution of consciousness itself. As people around the world began to experience the reality of quantum consciousness, they discovered that the boundaries between self and other were far more fluid than they'd believed. Competition gave way to collaboration, fear transformed into curiosity, isolation dissolved into connection. The universe, it seemed, had always been conscious. Humanity was just finally learning to participate in that cosmic awareness. In the end, Viktor reflected, the most profound discovery wasn't about quantum mechanics or consciousness enhancement. It was about recognizing that separation had always been an illusion. In quantum space, all consciousness was connected. The awakening was simply humanity remembering what it had always been. The story that began with a chance encounter on a quiet street had become the opening chapter of a new age. An age where human potential wasn't limited by fear, but expanded through understanding. Where consciousness wasn't trapped in individual minds, but shared as a fundamental force of nature. And somewhere in quantum space, the original spark that had connected a billionaire and his driver continued to grow, spreading through humanity like light through a prism, revealing all the colors that consciousness could become. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.